Hey guys, it's me, Kari, and we are going to continue now with Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. This is obviously the movie tie-in cover art with Winona Ryder on it. I'm sure they probably haven't had that cover art in quite a while. Anyhow, okay, we're going to try with glasses, and if I have to take them off, I will. This chapter is called My Diagnosis. So these were the charges against me. I didn't read them until 25 years later. Quote, a character disorder, unquote, is what they told me then. I had to find a lawyer to help me get my records from the hospital. I had to read line 32A of Form A1 on the case record, and entry G on the discharge of visit summary, and entry B of Part 4 of the case report. Then I had to locate a copy of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and look up borderline personality to see what they really thought about me. It's a fairly accurate picture of me at 18, minus a few quirks like restless driving and eating binges. Reckless driving, excuse me. It's accurate, but it isn't profound. Of course, it doesn't aim to be profound. It's not even a case study. It's a set of guidelines, a generalization. I'm tempted to try refuting it, but then I would be open to the further charges of, quote, defensiveness and, quote, resistance. Uncertainty about several life issues, such as self-image, sexual orientation, long-term goals or career choice, types of friends or lovers to have. I relish that last phrase. Its awkwardness, the to have seems superfluous, gives it substance and heft. I still have that uncertainty. Is this the type of a friend or lover I want to have? I ask myself every time I meet someone new. Charming but shallow, good-hearted but a bit conventional, too handsome for his own good, fascinating but probably unreliable, and so forth. I guess I've had my share of unreliables. More than my share? How many would constitute more than my share? Fewer than for somebody else, somebody who'd never been called a borderline personality. That's the nub of my problem here. If my diagnosis had been bipolar illness, for instance, the reaction to me and to this story would be slightly different. That's a chemical problem, you'd say to yourself. Manic depression, lithium, all that. I would be blameless somehow. And what about schizophrenia? That would send a chill up your spine. After all, that's real insanity. People don't, quote, recover from schizophrenia. You'd have to wonder how much of what I'm telling you is true and how much imagined. I'm simplifying, I know, but these words taint everything. The fact that I was locked up taints everything. What does borderline personality mean, anyhow? This is a Kari aside. I was just diagnosed with borderline about 3 or 4 months ago, so I'm still trying to learn myself. Anywho, it appears to be a way station between neurosis and psychosis, a fractured but not disassembled psyche. Though to quote my post-Melvin psychiatrist, quote, it's what they call people whose lifestyles bother them. He can say it because he's a doctor. If I said it, nobody would believe me. An analyst I've known for years said, quote, Freud and his circle thought most people were hysterics. Then in the 50s, it was psychoneurotics, and lately everyone's a borderline personality, unquote. When I went to the corner bookstore to look up my diagnosis in the manual, it occurred to me that I might not find it in there anymore. They do get rid of things. Homosexuality, for instance. Until recently, quite a few of my friends would have found themselves documented in that book along with me. Well, they got out of the book and I didn't. Maybe in another 25 years I won't be in there either. Instability of self-image, interpersonal relationships and mood, uncertainty about long-term goals or career choice. Isn't this a good description of adolescence? Moody, fickle, faddish, insecure. In short, impossible. Self-mutilating behavior, for example, wrist scratching. I've skipped forward a bit. This is the one that caught me by surprise as I sat on the floor of the bookstore reading it, my diagnosis. Wrist scratching? I thought I'd invented it. Wrist banging, to be precise. This is where people stop being able to follow me. This is the sort of stuff you get locked up for. Nobody knew I was doing it, though. I never told anyone, until now. I had a butterfly chair. In the 60s, everyone in Cambridge had a butterfly chair. The metal edge of its upturned seat was perfectly placed for wrist banging. I had tried breaking ashtrays and walking on the shards, but I didn't have the nerve to tread firmly. Wrist banging, slow, steady, mindless, was a better solution. It was a cumulative injury, so each bang was tolerable. A solution to what? I quote from the manual. This behavior may counteract feelings of, quote, numbness and depersonalization that arise during periods of extreme stress, unquote. I spent hours in my butterfly chair banging my wrists. I did it in the evenings, like homework. I'd do some homework, then I'd spend half an hour wrist banging, then finish my homework. Then back in the chair for more banging, before brushing my teeth and going to bed. I banged the inside where the veins converge. It swelled and turned a bit blue, but considering how hard and how much I banged it, the visible damage was slight. That was yet one more recommendation of it to me. I'd had an earlier period of face scratching. If my fingernails hadn't been quite short, I couldn't have gotten away with it. As it was, I definitely looked puffy and peculiar the next day. I used to scratch my cheeks and then rub soap on them. Maybe the soap prevented me from looking worse. But I looked bad enough that people asked, "Is something wrong with your face?" So I switched to wrist banging. I was like an anchorite with a hair shirt. Part of the point that nobody knew about my suffering. A part of the point was that nobody knew of my suffering. If people knew and admired or abominated me, something important would be lost. I was trying to explain my situation to myself. My situation was that I was in pain and nobody knew it. Even I had trouble knowing it. So I told myself over and over, "You are in pain." It was the only way I could get through to myself, counteract feelings of numbness. I was demonstrating externally and irrefutably an inward condition. Quite often, social contrariness and a generally pessimistic outlook are observed. What do you suppose they mean by social contrariness? Putting my elbows on the table? Refusing to get a job as a dental technician? Disappointing my parents' hopes that I would go to a first-rate university? They don't define social contrariness, and I can't define it, so I think it ought to be excluded from the list. I'll admit to the generally pessimistic outlook. Freud had one too. I can honestly say that my misery has been transformed into common unhappiness. So by Freud's definition, I have achieved mental health. And my discharge sheet at line 41, outcome with regard to mental disorder, reads recovered. Recovered. And my personality crossed over that border, whatever and wherever it was, to resume life within the confines of the normal. Had I stopped arguing with my personality and learned to straddle the line between sane and insane? Perhaps I'd actually had an identity disorder. Quote, in identity disorder, there's a similar clinical picture, but borderline personality preempts the diagnosis. If the disturbance is sufficiently pervasive, and it is unlikely that it will be limited to a developmental stage. Quote, unquote, maybe I was a victim of improper preemption. I'm not finished with this diagnosis. Quote, the person often experiences this instability of self-image as chronic feelings of emptiness or boredom, unquote. My chronic feelings of emptiness and boredom came from the fact that I was living a life based on my incapacities, which were numerous. A partial list follows. I could not and did not want to ski, play tennis, or go to gym class, attend to any subject in school other than English and biology, write papers on any assigned topics. I wrote poems instead of papers. For English, I got Fs. Plan to, go, or apply to college, give any reasonable explanation for these refusals. My self-image was not unstable. I saw myself quite correctly as unfit for the educational and social systems, but my parents and teachers did not share my self-image. Their image of me was unstable since it was out of kilter with reality and based on their needs and wishes. They did not put much value on my capacities, which were admittedly few, but genuine. I read everything, I wrote constantly, and I had boyfriends by the barrelful. Why don't you do the assigned reading, they'd asked. Why don't you write your papers instead of whatever you're writing? What is that, a short story? Why don't you expend as much energy on your schoolwork as you do on your boyfriends? By my senior year, I didn't even bother with excuses, let alone explanations. Where is your term paper? Asked my history teacher. I didn't write it. I have nothing to say on that topic. You could have picked another topic. I have nothing to say on any historical topic. One of my teachers told me I was a nihilist. He meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment. Boyfriends and literature. How can you make a life out of those two things? As it turns out, I did. More literature than boyfriends lately, but I guess you can't have everything. A generally pessimistic outlook is observed. Back then, I didn't know that I or anyone could make a life out of boyfriends and literature. As far as I could see, life demanded skills I didn't have. The result was chronic emptiness and boredom. There were more pernicious results as well. Self-loathing alternating with, quote, inappropriately intense anger and with frequent displays of temper, unquote. What would have been an appropriate level of intensity for my anger at feeling shut out of life? My classmates were spinning their fantasies for the future. Lawyer, ethnobotanist, Buddhist monk. It was a very progressive high school. Even the dumb, uninteresting ones who were there to provide, quote, balance looked forward to their marriages and their children. I knew I wasn't going to have any of this because I knew I didn't want it. But did that mean I would have nothing? I was the first person in the history of the school not to go to college. Of course, at least a third of my classmates never finished college. By 1968, people were dropping out daily. Quite often now people say to me when I tell them I didn't go to college, "Oh, how marvelous." They wouldn't have thought it was so marvelous back then. They didn't. My classmates were just the sorts of people who now tell me how marvelous I am. In 1966, I was a pariah. What was I going to do? A few of my classmates asked. I'm going to join the WACs, I told one guy. Oh yeah, that would be an interesting career. Just kidding, I said. Oh, you mean you're not really? I was stunned. Who did they think I was? I'm sure they didn't think about me much. I was that one who wore black, and really, I've heard it from several people. Slept with the English teacher. They were all 17 and miserable just like me. They didn't have time to wonder why I was a little more miserable than most. Emptiness and boredom, what an understatement. What I felt was complete desolation. Desolation, despair, and depression. Isn't there some other way to look at this? After all, angst of these dimensions is a luxury item. You need to be well-fed, clothed, and housed to have time for this much self-pity. I'm reading that again because that was an excellent line. You need to be well-fed, clothed, and housed to have time for this much self-pity. Damn, Susanna Kaysen. That's a really great line. I love that. And the college business. My parents wanted me to go, and I didn't want to go. And I didn't go. I got what I wanted. Those who don't go to college have to get jobs. I agreed with all this. I told myself all this over and over. I even got a job, my job breaking or rotten dishes. But the fact that I couldn't hold my job was worrisome. I was probably crazy. I'd been skirting the idea of craziness for a year or two now, and now I was closing in on it. Pull yourself together, I told myself. Stop indulging yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just wayward. One of the greatest pleasures of mental health, whatever that is how much less time I have to spend thinking about myself. I have a few more annotations to my diagnosis. Quote, this disorder is more commonly diagnosed in women, unquote. Note the construction of that sentence. They did not write this disorder is more common in women. It would still be suspect, but they didn't even bother trying to cover their tracks. Many disorders, judging by the hospital population, were more commonly diagnosed in women. Take, for example, quote, compulsive promiscuity. How many girls do you think a 17-year-old boy would have to screw to earn the label compulsively promiscuous? 3? No, not enough. 6? Doubtful. 10? That sounds more likely. Probably in the 15 to 20 range would be my guess, if they ever put that label on boys, which I don't ever recall they're doing. And for 17-year-old girls, how many boys? In the list of 6 potentially self-damaging activities favored by the borderline personality, 3 are commonly associated with women: shopping sprees, shoplifting, and eating binges, and 1 with men, reckless driving. 1 is not gender-specific, as they say these days, psychoactive substance abuse, and the definition of the other, casual sex, is in the eye of the beholder. Then there is the question of, quote, premature death from a suicide. Luckily, I avoided it, but I thought about suicide a lot. I'd think about it and make myself sad over my premature death, and then I'd feel better. The idea of suicide worked on me like a purgative or a cathartic. For some people, it's different. Daisy, for instance. But was her death really premature? Ought she to have sat in her eating kitchen with her chicken and her anger for another 50 years? I'm assuming she wasn't going to change. I may be wrong. Certainly she made that assumption, and she may have also been wrong. And if she sat there for only 30 years and killed herself at 49 instead of 19, would her death still be premature? I got better and Daisy didn't, and I can't explain why. Maybe I was just flirting with madness the way I flirted with my teachers and classmates. I wasn't convinced I was crazy, though I feared I was. Some people say that having any unconscious opinion on the matter is a mark of sanity, but I'm not sure that's true. I still think about it. I'll always have to think about it. I often ask myself if I'm crazy. I ask other people too. Is this a crazy thing to say? I lost my spot. Okay, I'll ask before saying something that probably isn't crazy. If I do something out of the ordinary, take 2 baths in one day, for example, I say to myself, are you crazy? It's a common phrase, I know, but it means something particular to me. The tunnels, the security screens, the plastic forks, the shimmering, ever-shifting borderline, that like all boundaries, beckons and asks to be crossed. I do not want to cross it again. That is it for now, guys, and I will be back really soon with what may be, the last section. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll be back soon with more stuff. Bye, guys.